what this election cycle in 2020 was all about. Do you want liberty or do you want tyranny? And we have seen tyranny manifest itself in these various so-called swing states of Georgia and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan and Arizona and Nevada. And a very smart guy, I mentioned him before, John Lott, did an investigation. Statistically speaking, he just looked at the numbers. That's who he is. He's a numbers guy. He crunched the numbers. And he looked at 2016's numbers in particular Georgia and in Pennsylvania. And then he compared them to 2020 in terms of the uniformity. He's looking for some sort of statistical uniform. That's what number people do, right? There are variations. People vote one way in an election and then another way in the next election. That's understood. But there shouldn't be wild swings in these numbers, but that's exactly what has occurred in these so-called swing states. And I want to dive a little bit into this piece of research, this piece investigation, not with John Lott, but with one of John Lott's peers. Joining me now is the Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Miami, Louis Locay. Louis, I want to talk about this research produced by John Lott, who can't come on the program because he is part of the administration, part of the Department of Justice right now, and so he has to jump through hoops in order to get on, but you're his surrogate, if you will, and he produced this bombshell, I call it a bombshell piece of research, really a piece of mathematics, and that's why you're speaking in his absentia. And the piece is titled, "A Simple Test for the Extent of Vote Fraud with Absentee Ballots in the 2020 Presidential Election, Georgia and Pennsylvania Data." Now, let's stop there before I dive into it. This is about 25 pages long. I would imagine you're part of the peer review process. Is that correct?
Well, I haven't peer reviewed it officially, but I am familiar with his work. I've read this paper, and I've drawn up some comments. I haven't given them to him yet, but I've got some comments on that work. So I thought about it, very carefully. In other words, I would be ready right now to give a peer review of his of that article. Yes.
And before I dive into the summary, and we're just going to scratch into the summary,
right,
because it pretty well sums up what the research is all about. If you had to summarize your peer review of this, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you had to summarize what you're looking at, what you read, and how you decipher it, what is your summary of the report?
Well, my summary of the report would be that it's an interesting and I think fairly convincing piece of work. What he's doing essentially is he's looking at precincts that are adjoining, and he's looking at mostly, for example, the best example is Fulton County, where Atlanta is located, and he looks at counties that are majority Republican around it, and by looking at precincts that are adjacent to each other, he's looking at precincts that are tend to be similar in most ways that matter for voting. Furthermore, he has data, or he compares the two adjoining precincts in terms of the difference in their in-person voting. So the argument is that two adjoining precincts, their differences in the absentee ballots should be similar to the differences in their in-person voting. And he checks this for 2016, and he finds that that's in fact the case. However,
in other words, there should be uniformity here. There should be
it should be similar. Yes. In other words,
uniformity.
If in two adjacent precincts, the difference in the share of Trump's vote is 5%, then the difference in the absentee ballot should be about 5%. And he does that for 2016, and he finds that that's in fact the case. Then he turns to 2020, and he finds that when you look at precincts adjacent precincts where one of them happens to be in Fulton County, that relationship breaks down. All of a sudden, Fulton County precincts seem to get a bump in the Biden vote.
All right, let's stop there for a moment and look at what he says about what's happening or what happened in Atlanta. And these are estimates, based on empirical evidence. These are based on he's a number cruncher, and that's effectively what he's doing. You're a professor of economics. You have
Yeah.
to crunch numbers. I want to cut to the heart of this thing. The best estimate shows an unusual 7.81% drop in Trump's percentage of absentee ballots for Fulton County alone of 11,350 votes, or over 80% of Biden's vote lead in Georgia. So, in other words, he's looking at this one way, and then he's trying to put it in tangible terms in another.
Exactly.
What it did to the numbers on election night or the couple of days after election, it literally turned the numbers. And we know that Atlanta and that county, Fulton County, is the epicenter for the election malfeasance, that there is reams of evidence, including videotape evidence, occurred there. But from a statistician's perspective, from a professor of economics perspective, this is a red flag, is it not? Because you do look for uniformity in numbers.
It is a red flag. It suggests that something happened there that we can't explain, that's unusual. But furthermore, I believe that for technical reasons that we really can't get into here, that actually ends up being an underestimate. In other words, there's another part of his own estimates that suggests that it's actually bigger than that. So I would think that is a significant lower bound. And yes, because not only is it's not only that the Fulton County seems to have given more votes to Biden, but the relationship between the in-person voting and the mail-in voting tended to break down, which also suggests that something went funny there. You see,
right?
In other words, the connection that was close in 2016 is no longer close now.
So he did the same approach, crunched the same numbers in Allegheny County, which is in Pennsylvania. Again,
right. That's where Pittsburgh is, I believe.
Right, one of the epicenters of election malfeasance that took place in 2020. He did it for both absentee and provisional ballots. And this is particularly interesting in Pennsylvania because of what we know now, and I'll get to that in a moment. He says, quote, the estimated number of fraudulent votes from those two sources is about 55,270 votes. Now, remember, the margins of victory in these states, Georgia and Pennsylvania, and I believe in Wisconsin as well, and Michigan, were very, very narrow. And when you start piecing this together, and I'm not asking you to have conjecture here, I'll do the conjecturing here. But when you start piecing this together, and if you stop counting ballots, and if you were trying to cheat in an election, you stop counting ballots, you stop the machine so you could figure out exactly how many fraudulent votes you need to produce to put your guy over the top, this would fit in very, very nicely. But back to the evidence. He ran the same kind of empirical data in Pittsburgh, again, a swing state, again, epicenter for a lot of the malfeasance that went on. One would imagine, if you're a statistician or an economics professor like yourself, if you start digging and peeling back the onion in these various counties, in these various cities like Detroit, possibly, or in Milwaukee, or in Phoenix, that you might see similar patterns here. Is that a leap?
Yeah, I think so. And what's more, I think, by the way, John's very good at when he finds one of these anomalies, he starts looking for other explanations too, you see. Yeah. So he does look in that paper. He looks at other things, do we find that maybe, we can explain this in some other way? And he tries to look for that. He doesn't find that explains it either. And so, and the more you look at these things, the more anomalies you tend to find. Also remember that, and John points this out in the paper, that all this that he's finding is always relative to whatever vote fraud already took place in the in-person voting. Because this is relative to the in-person voting. So if there's already sort of a background amount of cheating going on elsewhere, it's not going to be picked up by this.
Right. And
so this is, and for this reason and for my technical reasons, I believe that what he's finding is actually in both Allegheny County and Fulton County, what he's finding is definitely an underestimate of what the effect was.
And what this leads to is excess votes. which are impossible, right? As a mathematician, a statistician, it's impossible for you to have more votes than there are eligible voters. Yet in Pennsylvania,
apparently that's. I'm not a political scientist, so I can't really comment on that too much. The problem is that the apparently definitions of eligible voters have vary over time and over different sources. Sometimes people refer to registered voters. Sometimes people refer to people of a certain age, and a lot of these states have problems with they have same day registration,
yes,
and things like that. So they can always fill in the gap by saying people just registered that day, and so forth. But John does look at anomalies in the voter turnout in that paper, and he also finds that in some of these contested places where the data is available, we find anomalous results on voter turnout.
Right,
and which is also again another peculiar pattern.
Exactly, and so he concludes with a summary here. The estimates here indicate that there were 70,000 to 79,000 quote excess votes in Georgia and Pennsylvania alone. Adding, statistically speaking, here now he's projecting to the other states.
Right.
Adding Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin, the total increases to 289,000 quote excess votes. Now, again, you pointed out, and I'm going to point out again, this is probably a lowball estimate, but I will tell you again, as a statistician, I'm going to hit you with one more that I know to be true, that the state of Pennsylvania mailed out 1.8 million, quote, absentee ballots. They received 1.4 million absentee ballots back, yet they counted 2.5 million absentee ballots.
Yeah.
Now, on the prima facie, on
that looked like,
I'm not a professor. I went to a state university, for crying out loud, but I can do the math there and it don't add up.
Of course. You have to use common sense on these things, right? So if those numbers are actually true, I cannot verify them because I'm not familiar with them. But if that's the case, then of course that's on clear evidence that some shenanigans went on. But the kinds of things that John is doing is sort of equivalent to the following. Suppose you you play cards or you play some sort of random game like flipping a coin with someone, and the person wins 9 out of 10 times. Does that mean he's cheating? Well, it's possible, right? But you'd be pretty suspicious. If you find that the guy always wins, 9 out of 10 times, you would want to examine that coin carefully to see whether, he can make heads or whatever it is appear more likely.
I'm sending that guy straight to Vegas.
Exactly. Yeah.
9 out of 10 times, right?
Well, they'll probably throw him out of the clubs right away, right? I mean, so that's what and that's what. And by the way, beyond John's paper, there's just been a whole bunch of other approaches which are less specific and less quantifiable than his, that are looking for anomalies in the voting patterns. And it's just remarkable the number of these. None of these are peer reviewed yet or anything like that, as careful as John's. But what you do find in all these is they all point in the same direction, and they're all very different types of pattern recognitions type of results.
Right. Well, I always like to say figures lie and liars figure, but in the end, the numbers, as long as they're not being doctored, the numbers always speak for themselves, and the American people deserve to know the truth and have, I believe, a congressional investigation. I don't know why there hasn't been a blue ribbon commission set up by Mitch McConnell in the Senate yet. I don't understand exactly why. And the courts are not doing a wonderful job investigating. The DOJ doesn't seem to be interested. So where do the American people get relief? Well, they get relief from people like you and John Lott and Louis Locay. I appreciate you joining me, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Miami. Keep up the good work, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.